at Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies. Neva, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, we've got the bare bones of what we can expect in terms of that support package. Do you think it's enough?
Yeah, I think it is for the short-term relief that we need. I think it should make a big difference, especially reinstating the grants and the TERS, and also that they're getting relief to business. I think the real critical issue is that they have to fast track it. And, it's very hard for government to fast track anything.
Yes. Now, one of the things that the National Treasury indicates is that they won't need to borrow money, because people are always worried that when they need to fund something new, it will mean them having to go to the debt market. Can you just break down to the viewers exactly how they're going to manage that?
My understanding is that they're mostly because revenue has come in better than expected. So they had a very, very conservative estimate for revenue based on the downturn in the pandemic. And so instead of simply using that to reduce the deficit, which they might have done if we were in a better situation, they have some funds available to overcome the damage from the recent downturn. But I do want to flag something, which is when you say people are worried about debt, I do think that what this whole problem we're in now reflects the fact that, in a very unequal society, getting the balance right between borrowing and taxing more on the one hand, and on the other hand, maintaining government services is always more of an art than a science. And I think one of the reasons we ended up with the unrest was that we went a little bit too far towards saying, let's try and cut down on our debt and hold taxes at best steady, and in fact, likely reduce some of them.
Yes.
And you end up in a very unequal society. You end up with people feeling their needs are not being met, and then they turn to protest.
Yeah. But then that means that we do have possible tensions on the horizon between the President Ramaphosa, and National Treasury. The Finance Minister talked about how the fiscal framework, was sacrosanct, and it's very important that they don't breach their targets, because obviously they want to be liked by the likes of the ratings agencies and so on, so that we don't get downgraded. But at the same time, like you say, that could provide attention in the sense that we do still need funds to be able to support social grants and the like. And they talk about this being extended out to March 2022 because they say they can afford it because of the higher commodity taxes they've been able to take. But they say this should be a once-off thing. But in 6 months' time, where to then? We're still going to have poverty, inequality and unemployment, much more, given the unrest.
I think it's natural for Treasury. They're the people who have to go and borrow and, negotiate with creditors and pay their creditors and all of that stuff. It's natural for them to see that as one of the biggest dangers. But what we have seen in the past couple of weeks is that the risk of not meeting people's needs, particularly when we're in a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, that risk can be much greater. And so I think getting that balance right is not an issue for Treasury. It's an issue for government as a whole. This kind of internal negotiations, that's normal. What we need to say as society is, what do we want and how do we articulate that? And how do we ensure, either by using the money more effectively or if necessary by raising more money, that we actually meet those needs that are most desperate. I do think in a very unequal economy, in a democracy, these tensions get much sharper because the nature of the thing is there's an imbalance between political power where you have the majority, each person has one vote, and economic power where some people have greater power. And the one thing I would say that I think the minister raised that's really important is part of this is also a debate about how do we deal with inequality, that we all agree we need targeted programs to address inequality. Whether the best way to do that is through cash grants or through other measures that address the causes of inequality, which are not only education, which he said, but also deep inequalities in ownership of assets like land and housing. Income from work is unusually unequal in this country, and also who has access to infrastructure is still very unequal.
Yes.
So I think we need to have that discussion about what is the best way to deal with these inequalities, that they have to be dealt with and that it will cost. I don't think we can avoid that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The debate has to continue around that, how we address the inequality and so on and so forth. But I think there's still a lot of anxiety about where government is going to get money from in terms of the Sasria story. Sasria, I understand, has anything between 5 and 7 billion rand in its kitty, We're hearing that in eThekwini, in the Durban area, the damage amounts to some 15 billion rand. Not all of that will need to be covered by Sasria, but a big chunk of it. So given the deficit that will be there for Sasria, where will the money come from?
I think let's wait and see the final figures. I mean, have you ever claimed for insurance?
Yes, I have.
You know, these claims often run high. I think let's wait and see when the claims come in before we worry too much about that. You know, if Treasury's, this I do trust Treasury, and if they say they have the funds, I'm quite sure they have the funds.
Neva, thank you very much for your time. We're going to leave it there, given that we've run out of time. Neva Makgetla, she's a senior researcher at the Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies. We're going